Hey guys, I have two openings to take on factory partnerships where I'll be your partner on Amazon. You would work directly with me and sell through one of our accounts. If this is of interest to you, please email me directly, danny@sellersessions.com. Also, we're now open to take on more clients for our PPC agency Databrill. You can visit sellersessions.com/agency for more details and also request some of our new case studies. If you'd like to work with me one-on-one, turning around your business, some troubleshooting, dealing with ranking or PPC issues, you can book 1-hour consults via sellersessions.com/consultancy. Basically, this is a cost-effective way to troubleshoot your business and get a video recording of the session so you're able to put it into action post-call. Hey guys, welcome back to Seller Sessions. Today I bring in Paul Rafelson. How you doing?
Hey, how you doing?
Yeah,
Great. Good. Happy to be here.
Excellent. So what we're doing is a continuation from the show that we done last summer. So do you want to give the audience a little bit more background on yourself?
Sure. So my name's Paul Rafelson. I'm a lawyer. I represent Amazon sellers. My law firm represents Amazon sellers or e-commerce attorneys. We basically are a law firm that's focused on Amazon sellers. And I'm also one of the founders of a new trade association called the Online Merchants Guild, which is sort of the first of its kind trade association, really focused on advocacy and taking action on behalf of Amazon sellers, or actually e-commerce sellers, I should say, but obviously Amazon has been our main focus. But really, we're an e-commerce trade association, onlinemerchantsguild.org, and it's something I volunteer as because right now the number one issue facing Amazon sellers are facing sort of the existential crisis that it is tax. It's the sales tax. It's the unknowns like the income tax and other compliance obligations that sellers don't even know about that, can cost you, astronomical amounts of money to comply with. I mean, well over 6 figures if you have all the stuff you have to do. Factor in the amount of time it takes you. It could take you 10 hours a month more. If you got to go with every state, usually more, to do all this stuff. And you factor that in, it really gets hard to sell on Amazon, especially as a newer seller or sort of say even as a 7-figure seller. It really can put a dent in what you can earn. And then of course there's the issue of back taxes. We've got states coming after sellers for back taxes and things like that. So that's been our priority. But as an association, I'll say this real quick, man. We need this. This isn't a tax organization. This is a seller organization. And this tax is just one example. It's probably a great example of why people have trade associations. Why do the Wisconsin cheese farmers have a trade association, yet millions of Amazon sellers don't have any organization like this representing their political interests? And, because had this organization existed or some version of it existed, I don't know, years ago, tax probably wouldn't have happened like this. It probably would have been figured out before it ever got to this point. And we certainly have the numbers to create one of the most powerful organizations, lobbying organizations in the country. I mean, you look at one of our biggest in the U.S. is the American Association of Retired People. People pay like $60, $70 a year to join this thing, but the number of retired people is so big that they have a huge lobby. I mean, it's one of the biggest. And so, considering how many sellers there are out there, there's really no limit to what we could accomplish if people really understand that. And that goes with IP policy. It goes with restoring the balance of power with Amazon. I mean, there's things Amazon does that people don't understand. So, if you have the ability to lobby, if you have the influence and you can make things known, then you have a seat at the table to make a change. And so that's what we're trying to do.
Cool. Well, let's dial it back. Let's start with I know we chatted around June time, which is pre-Supreme Court ruling, which we'll get into. But let's just have a quick recap of the amnesty program. That was a little bit, for a better word of it, is a wolf in sheep clothing, mate. Not a sham, but a bit of a bait and switch. It's like, sign up now. There's some scare tactics, wasn't it? If you sign up now, you'll live to see another day, and we'll kind of do some back taxes and forgiveness. But can you tell me or tell the audience how that kind of panned out?
Sure. Yeah, I think sham is a good word, or shamnesty, as I often would call it.
Shamnesty, yeah.
It really was. It was really is a wolf in sheep's clothing, because I don't think, I think the states are very, very individually centric. They don't, the way you have to think about tax burden, the way the Supreme Court's thinking about tax burden is collective, not just a single state. And I think every state can say, hey, it's not that hard to comply with our state. And that's all they care about. And they don't really look at the fact that this is a collective burden that's going to destroy most sellers. You're not going to be able to do business unless you're really big and you can hire a full-time tax accountant to do all this stuff, or pay exorbitant amount of accounting fees. So here you had, I don't know, 20 odd states coming together and saying, we'll forgive your back sales tax if you sign up now. And you had about 2 months. We got an extension, I think like a 2-week extension. So it went from October 31 to November 15th. And this is when I first started helping sellers. This is sort of when I was pivoting out of being, corporate law, corporate tax lawyer for like Microsoft, as a GE actually, for a number of years, and then sort of pivoted into this. I used to be a seller, actually. I was a retail arbitrage person in law school. So I really did understand how ridiculous this was, because I had the personal experience that you guys had, in addition to the legal experience of litigating tax cases in just about every state, or all sorts of various disputes in every state. So yeah, this amnesty was really, it was quite deceiving. People would come in, they would register, they would hire these accounting firms, they would engage these software firms that masquerade as having legal analysis, or saying things that to me amount to legal advice, which to me which they're not allowed to do, but somehow they get away with it. And that was very confusing, because they were making very conclusory statements like, you have nexus, you must collect, right? Well, not necessarily. And even if you did, if you're not a retailer, it's not your responsibility to collect. So, which is another question that's out there, but you're not hearing that from them. So again, you can't, they're acting as if there's no gray, which is exactly what you're not supposed to do as a lawyer, right? It depends. Every answer a lawyer gives should always start with "it depends." That's the joke in law school. So they were giving very conclusory statements that were designed to make you think that you needed to do this. And so with the states threatening this amnesty, with most people thinking that you don't question what the governments tell you to do, even though that's pretty much what lawyers who work in the state legal field or any legal field do for a living, and wouldn't do so if the government wasn't wrong so often. So, and then so those people who registered, I mean, it's a nightmare. I talk to these people all the time. It's just an absolute nightmare. And, a lot of people didn't realize, well, yeah, you were forgiving my sales tax, but you didn't forgive my income tax. And all of a sudden they get billed from Wisconsin saying, you owe income tax, and this was criminal, which is not. It was an absolute disaster. And
so that's where the bait and switch is, because people are just so focused on the sales tax, but actually they've got their hands in your pockets for the other taxes that they failed to mention. So that is a complete bait and switch, isn't it? Without being upfront.
Absolutely. And for two types of sellers, it was interesting. So there's 3 ways income tax is a pain. Well, the number one way is it's impossible to comply with for a small seller. This is, a lot of my litigation comes from income tax, because that tends to be the more complicated, controversial area of tax law. Sales tax normally is not that complicated. It's more of a process problem, not a legal problem. Just now it's the biggest legal issue, tax, but that's more about the constitutional law than the tax. But the thing about, sales income tax is, one, if you're living in most states, you're probably paying income tax already to your home state. So it's about redistributing the pie. The problem is the cost of redistributing the pie can be really expensive, because you have to file, entity tax returns, you've got to file personal tax returns. In all these states, you've got to pay, minimum fees. So, for example, just from an accounting fee perspective, I mean, theoretically, the state of Mississippi would say, hey, you owe us $200, and for your accountant to file those tax returns, all the tax returns that need to be filed, that could cost you $2,000 or $3,000. It doesn't make any sense. It's highly unconstitutional, in my opinion. But that's, in my educational opinion, because we're not giving legal advice on this. This is we're just chatting. But from my perspective, it certainly reeks of unconstitutionality that this would happen. And if you have to do that in 30, 40 states, or every state where Amazon has some sort of presence, you can quickly see that just your income tax compliance burden goes up. Then you've got registering with the Secretary of State, which, again, the software firms don't tell you about that either. Oftentimes the states don't even tell you about that. But, if you fail to register for the Secretary of State in the state of Connecticut, it's $200 a month. And I bet you there are people out there who registered in Connecticut who don't even know that. have no idea that they're racking up this bill. I mean, sure, you can challenge it, but there are sellers who contact me like, $8,000 bill because they've been registered in Connecticut for so many years, and nobody ever told them that they should register with the Secretary of State. So yeah, it is a total sham. And then for foreign sellers, something worth noting. Technically, you most likely are not going to have to pay income tax in the United States because of tax treaties that exist.
Yeah, you have a treaty, exactly. Like for the UK, for instance, yeah.
Right, and they all have an Article 5, typically, which is permanent establishment, which is sort of the international version of Nexus. That typically would say, something like an FBA on its own wouldn't be enough to create, an income tax presence for you in the United States. So you file a informational return, a treaty return, and very simple, and be on your merry way. The problem is there's a Supreme Court case or two that have said the tax treaties don't apply at the state and local level.
Yeah.
And so what that means is that now as foreign sellers, even though you're not paying U.S. income tax, you're going to have to file state income tax returns, which means you have to prepare the proper U.S. income tax returns as a basis for preparing state income tax returns. So now you're paying state income tax. So that can put your costs up, 4%, 5%, whatever the average state tax rate would be for you. And then of course sales tax collection. So it's a nightmare for the foreign sellers too, if you're, believing what the states say and go along with their perspective. And then for the few sellers who live in states where there are no income tax, then yeah, you're going to see your state tax costs go up. But it's a nightmare. It's a total nightmare, and you don't get that warning. And I love how many times I go on Facebook groups and mention those points, and people say, "Nah, there was no income tax amnesty." And on OMG's website, we have in our FAQ, we have a link that shows you, yeah, it was there. They were very clear that your sales tax responsibility is also an income tax responsibility. You just have to read the fine print.
Yeah.
So that was the amnesty, and so that was kind of the craziness. And then after amnesty, we just had a sort of this general period of fear leading up to Wayfair's decision. That now is the time.
That's the Supreme Court ruling. So for clarity for listeners that may be not aware of this, so this was happening in June last year. So we had amnesty or shemnesty, as you'd like to call it, not me, was 2017-ish, that kind of stuff. Then June, if we put the timeline together, June was the Supreme Court ruling. Do you want to go into that?
Yeah, exactly. So we had that sort of lull of, they accepted the Supreme Court signaled they're going to take the case. I think it was in October. I can't remember, October, November. It was October. We actually wrote a Supreme Court brief. Online Merchants Guild wrote a Supreme Court brief, which you can Google and read. I wrote it actually for Wayfair to give the seller perspective. I do believe it was effective. My colleagues in the tax space believe it was effective in getting the message across, and we can hear that in the oral argument, things that they discussed that were from us and nobody else. And which were good things because this helped sort of shape the decision. And then we had the decision, this is the big sales tax case. This was the great, physical presence sales tax nexus has been around since, was it 59? The Bellis-Hess case, and then we had the more recent and well-known Quill case in 1992. And since 1992, e-commerce companies have been sort of relying on this physical presence law to say they don't have to collect sales tax because the court said it was too burdensome to collect sales tax if you didn't have a physical presence back in 92, not realizing how different the world was going to be. And so finally in 2018, the Supreme Court takes on this case. You've got a multi-billion-dollar company called Wayfair trying to say that it's really hard for them to collect sales tax, even though plenty of billion-dollar companies and and $100 million companies collect sales tax in 50 states. Wayfair was trying to say that it was too burdensome, as well as the other parties, Newegg, Overstock. And the Supreme Court just called it as it is, as nonsense. I mean, basically, that's what this case is about. This case was about putting physical presence to bed as a sole determining factor of whether or not you had a tax nexus. It was the Supreme Court, there was an animus towards Wayfair making this claim. They thought it was ridiculous. And that's what this case was really about. It was about preventing these types of companies from avoiding sales tax.
Mm-hmm.
It was not about giving the states the right to go after small sellers or even any seller, because unless you're doing, I forget what the definition of a small business is, but it's, if you're in the, I think it's like 20, 50, I mean, it's a lot before you kind of get into that medium-sized business loan. But it's quite a lot. So, I mean, if you're a $20 million seller, $25 million, you're still a small business.
Yeah.
And the court case was very clear that that's not what this case was about. The reason they brought the case against Wayfair was for that purpose. They wanted this gray. They knew they were going to win. They knew the court was going to do something for them. And had they brought the case against the small seller who they were really targeting, these small e-commerce sellers that they target, they would have lost. Obviously, well, not that they would have lost, but it would have been a much more obvious. I mean, can you imagine bringing a $2 million seller before the Supreme Court and saying, yeah, they should be collecting sales tax in every state? I mean, they would be laughed out of court. But even in that instance, the court would probably say you can still go after companies like Wayfair, billion-dollar companies, because that's totally different. So that case was really, it has really been sort of like misinterpreted on purpose. In fact, if you really read our brief that we wrote, I mean, one of the points I made is that they didn't even need this case to make Wayfair collect. Wayfair does enough in each state through its affiliates, through having delivery trucks that give what they call white glove delivery. These companies do enough where states could easily assert nexus against them, and it would never ever be subject to challenge, or at least if it went to the Supreme Court, they would lose, because that's what happened to Amazon in New York back in 2012, 13. I can't remember the exact year of the case, when the state of New York said you have nexus because there are people in New York who have blogs, and those blogs have links to your website so that they can buy like Battlestar Galactica stuff on your Battlestar Galactica blog, and that gives you nexus. And so that sort of concept of affiliate nexus, which goes way back to some really old Supreme Court cases, 50s, I believe, would have made put all those companies in a situation where they would have had nexus if the states wanted to. But that's not the case they wanted to bring. They wanted to bring economic nexus, and they wanted to bring it against a billion-dollar company, and then they wanted to twist that decision into some sort of mandate that they're allowed to go after small sellers. And it's not true. And the court was very clear about that.
Yeah.
And the court did not say this 200 transaction test was allowed or the $100,000. What they said was it seems like it would be okay, but they don't have a record to really say one or the other. But what they did say was the reason why we think it might be okay is because we have optimism that there are these software programs coming online that are going to make it easy. And that's the key, make it easy. Well, that hasn't happened. And the court didn't have a record of it. And they made it clear that a case could be brought to challenge these laws, basically saying these things, that it's not, that the states haven't made it easy, or that there are other ways for states to do this that wouldn't burden interstate commerce. And a perfect example of this is what we call the marketplace laws. And we're seeing that more and more, where states are passing laws that just say, you know what, enough is enough. Amazon collects. We're not going to get into the whole whether or not Amazon's a retailer or not. We're just going to make it clear once and for all. Amazon and other marketplaces need to collect sales tax.
Yeah.
Amazon certainly prefers it that way because it takes the pressure of potential back tax liability assertions off of them. If a state changes the law, it makes it a lot harder for the state to go after Amazon for back taxes if that's how it's done, versus just saying, hey, Amazon, we think this law says you're a retailer and you should start collecting. In that case, they worry that opens them up to back tax liability, because if that's what the law says now, and that's what the law said, years ago. So this is the Amazon lobby prefer way to do it, and that's what they lobby for. I mean, they typically lobby to not have those laws get passed because they prefer to sell goods tax-free. But if it's going to happen, if the state's going to make the switch, this is how they prefer it's done. Yeah. And that's what they're doing. And states are picking, and that's a prime example of how unconstitutional individual seller tax enforcement is because we have case law out there that says, like, listen, you've got door number one, you got door number two. Door number one, you got 3% of sellers complying. Door number two is 100% of sellers complying. Door number one with the 3% means 4 million different sellers, or however many, have to individually comply, and you have to go enforce that, and force 4 million people to file tax returns in every state. Door number two, one company collects sales tax on behalf of 4 million people. And that company is a multi-billion-dollar company that's making a lot of money on these transactions, by the way. So the constitutional law case law that we have out there, one case that comes to mind, Pike versus Bruce Church, is going to say, hey, yeah, the state has the right to collect sales tax, but if the way in which they're going about it is super burdensome, then there's an interest in terms of what harm they're causing our sort of interstate commerce, the ability to do business across the U.S.
Yeah.
If this is going to have a major burden, if it's going to slow it down, if it's going to disrupt interstate commerce, then the states may not be able to do it. But in this case, tax is such a big interest, it's hard to say that they want the right to tax. But what makes this such an easy case is that there's an obvious alternative, which is the marketplace collection. So we don't have to worry about what the states can or can't do. We just have to tell the states there's an easier way, and you are obligated to do it because the easier way doesn't harm interstate and international commerce, for that matter. So the states have a constitutional obligation to pursue marketplace or require Amazon to collect in some form of fashion, and yet they're choosing not to because it's, again, they know Amazon doesn't want to do it. They don't want to be on Amazon's bad list. They want Amazon to bring in those jobs and those warehouses. It's all down
to politics at the end of that.
It's 100% politics and money. Yeah. Absolutely.
So then when you look at what we're looking at now, in 12 months out of 45 collecting states, Amazon's listed for 12 now for collection. Is that right, roughly?
Yeah, it's 12. It's I feel like I'm forgetting two, but yeah, it was started in Washington, Pennsylvania, was in Minnesota, Oklahoma, New Jersey, Connecticut, Alabama.
Hey guys, that's it from us. Please rejoin us again in a few days' time.